Should be recording now. So, hello there. Welcome, everybody, to our special edition midweek episode of the Reserve Squad. You guys can follow us on Instagram at the Reserve Squad. It's all lowercase, or obviously subscribe here on YouTube. We definitely want our followers to be engaged. So, leave some comments. Let us know what you guys think about all of our podcast episodes. Any debates that we get into, any topics we get into, any topics that you guys would like to see us discuss, let us know, right? Because that's what we're here for. We're here to keep everybody engaged, keep you guys going, and also just to have fun. So some of you guys might know that the Reserve Squad is typically a 4-member panel, and there's only 2 of us here today. It's going to be myself and Andy. Andy, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well, Tyler. It is a beautiful Tuesday afternoon, and I cannot wait to talk about the latest gossip that's been going around. How about yourself?
Yeah, man, I'm doing good too. So that's pretty much what we're here for, right? Gossip, transfers. That's why we're here in the midweek on a Transfer Tuesday. Typically, we get together on the weekends and we discuss Premier Leagues, all the news, hottest weeks, everything there is from the Premier League. And we wanted to get together, Andy and I, and create some additional content for the middle of the week. We figured going into July, a real big opportunity is going to be the transfer window. And so that's what we're here to talk about, is going to be all things transfer window. The outlook, the goal is to run this, on Tuesday nights, Tuesday afternoons, depending on our availability, and catch up on what the latest transfer confirmations are, the latest rumors, and what the biggest stories are. Give you guys our take, our opinions on those. And of course, like I said before, on Instagram or here in YouTube, subscribe and give us all your opinions too. So with that, Andy, I want to just go ahead and get right into it. July 1st was a one-day opening for a lot of countries. And I know later in July is going to be the official transfer window opening because COVID and everything's kind of messing some things up. The market's a little bit weird. But I'm just going to go ahead and read off what we have confirmed so far. And, we'll get your opinion on that and see where we go from here. So I'm going to start with a few loan deals. These players were all loaned to specific clubs this year, and these loans have now become permanent. I think it's something that's important to note. There's 4 of them that I have for you here. One is Mauro Icardi at PSG. That's permanent now. Alvaro Morata at Atletico Madrid. Giovanni Lo Celso at Tottenham. And Emre Can at Dortmund. So I think those 4 right there are all no real surprises there. All have had certain impacts going into this season. What's your thoughts on them?
I would say for me, the biggest one out of all of those would have to be Lo Celso. I feel like Lo Celso has made a pretty positive impact to Jose Mourinho's side at Tottenham. While he hasn't gotten the starting position a whole lot, every time he's come on, he seems like he brings a new energy and lifeline to Mourinho's side. And, granted, Mourinho plays a heavy defensive style, so it's not as exciting. But when they are kind of moving into an offensive transition, Lo Celso's been great with kind of getting that second assist, you could kind of say, with feeding the assister in order to get some goals. So I would say his impact is pretty good. McCarty obviously is a quality player. But it's kind of hard to stand out at a club like PSG. So I would just say the Lo Celso transfer was probably the one that has made the most impact in my eyes, at least.
Yeah, I think so too. I'd agree with you on there. I think Emre Can to Dortmund's an interesting one. But Lo Celso, you just watched that last game alone. I thought him and Son were very impactful for Tottenham, and I think that that's going to be huge for them moving forward. So I definitely like that move. But I don't think any of those loan moves becoming permanent were real surprises. When you talk about transfers and other news like that, some guys completely being purchased and going to new teams or on free transfers, we got a little bit more, I don't know if you call it surprises, but I definitely think interesting topics there. So when you get on that list, I think, you got to mention the Arthur and Pjanic swap deal between Barcelona and Juventus. We're going to get into that in more detail a little bit later, but that's definitely a huge one so far this summer. You obviously had Achraf Hakimi. He was at loan at Dortmund, and he's going on a permanent transfer to Inter Milan. And what Dortmund's doing to replace him is they're bringing in Thomas Meunier. And Meunier is actually going to be a free transfer. I think that's something that's interesting too. So, there's those guys. And then obviously big move, Timo Werner and Ziyech, both going to Chelsea. So when you talk about permanent transfers and those kind of names that I just threw out there, what's your reaction to that?
Lampard is making a statement. That Chelsea club is pushing for title contention in the Premier League, and those 2 additions are solid additions to their already pretty strong attack. the striker position has definitely been a little bit of an interesting role for Tammy this season, at least at Chelsea. I think Timo is definitely going to earn that position, and he's definitely going to make a huge impact with Chelsea. And I think that with those two transfers, it also kind of gives Frank a little bit of freedom to kind of help fill in a little bit of other holes and maybe adds a little bit more depth to the squad. But, I mean, Timo's heat map is all over the place. He's left to right. I mean, there's literally no area up top that man doesn't cover, and that compared with Pulisic and the work ethic of Mount, I think it's just going to be extremely positive. Ziyech is an interesting one. You don't see him too much over in the Dutch league, but his impact in the Champions League, from what I've seen, has been phenomenal, and I think he'll definitely fight for a place there. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Frank has made some pretty good moves this offseason, and I have a big feeling that Chelsea aren't slowing down in the transfer market.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, I don't know how they're doing it. It seems like all clubs are kind of financially struggling right now, and here's Chelsea going out, bringing in Ziyech, bringing in Werner, rumored to get some other guys. It's like, what's going on? You know, when are all the other teams going to start joining the club here and hopping on the bandwagon? I actually think Frank's in a tough position. I think, you know, when you got guys like Mason Mount, how do you not start Mason Mount? The form that Pulisic is in, he's scoring goals left and right over the last few games. How do you not play him? If Williams stays, Williams is starter. Tammy Abraham, he can play ball too. And then you talk about Ziyech and Werner. Well, you can't really not play those guys. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what Frank does. I think he's done very well in his first season with Chelsea. I think he's going to be very creative with what he does on the offensive side. I actually think it's the defensive side of the ball that Chelsea needs to work on the most. But I do agree with you in the sense that Werner and Ziyech, what Frank Lampard does there is going to be very, very fun to watch next season. Go ahead.
Another key one that you missed over there too is Hudson-Odoi. I mean, they just gave him a very large contract, and you know, to a certain degree, you could kind of say he's a little bit unproven. He's had some pretty good spells in his past couple of years at Chelsea for sure, but there is definitely a little bit of pressure with him getting that contract. I mean, when you look at Mason Mount, Pulisic, Odoi, and just all the youth that they have over there, and then adding in Ziyech to them, it's going to make them great in terms of depth. But I do think that with these additions, it could push a couple players out, and I think William might be one of those players, but it's tough to say because I think he is enjoying football at Chelsea.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if there's one guy in that roster that has a chip on his shoulder, it's Hudson-Odoi. I think seeing which players get pushed out is going to be interesting. If Williams won, we know Pedro's going to Roma. We know that the midfield is also crowded. You know, Kovacic has had a great season. What happens with Jorginho? You know, what happens in the midfield in general? Conte is the one that really has it locked down. So that'll be something that's interesting to see moving forward. You know, for those of you watching, I think you might be sitting here thinking that I forgot about one big transfer. Probably the biggest transfer of the window here, and actually our headliner, is Leroy Sané to Bayern Munich. That's my team. Bayern Munich. So I'm real happy. I'm real excited that this has finally happened. But I want to hear, you know, what was your first thought, first reaction when the Leroy Sané to Bayern Munich transfer finally got made official?
3 words: about damn time. Man, this transfer saga has been probably one of the longest ones that I've seen in a long time. But honestly, it makes complete sense on both sides. I mean, you look at what City have done this past year and how they've pretty much done without Sané with his injury this season. And they've done pretty well. They have, you know, some pretty good backup players. So I think it's a good move for City. They were going to lose him regardless. I mean, at the end of the day, Leroy Sané is a German. He's going to be going to Bayern. Bayern is the club to be at when you're from Germany, especially. So like the jersey you got going over there. But I think it's going to be positive. I think for both clubs, it's definitely going to be positive. I mean, obviously City are losing out on a great player, but they have quite a bit of depth with Mahrez and, you know, a couple of youth players that can play those positions. So it'll be interesting to see, but I'm really excited to see what his impact is going to be with Bayern, and I'm sure you'll talk about it a little bit later, but Alphonso Davies and Leroy Sané on that left wing is just going to be crazy. Yeah,
I mean, and that's kind of where we're getting at now. I mean, but sticking with City at first, right? So Leroy Sané departing Manchester City is a big deal. You mentioned the depth of their squad and kind of moving forward without him. Do you think they need to replace him?
Do they need to replace him? No. Could they replace him? Sure. In my opinion, if you ask me, I think with Manchester City, their biggest flaw right now is their defense. They have Laporte. Laporte is a solid defender, but then you have the likes of John Stones, Otamendi. I know there's another one that I'm missing. I can't think of off the top of my head, but there are a couple of them out there, and I think the biggest thing is they need to bolster that defense a little bit more. I mean, even their outside backs, you have Kyle Walker, who's getting a little bit younger, or is getting a little bit older, so you might want to freshen up that defense a little bit, and I think that's really the only pain point for City. So if they were to buy a quality winger, I think that would definitely help them, but I think the money could go to better use going towards a center back or maybe an outside back.
Okay.
What about yourself?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think I'll come at it with a little bit of a different perspective. I don't disagree that they need defensive help, but I do think that Sané was such an impactful part of Pep Guardiola's plans moving forward. Knowing the type of managerial style that Pep has, regardless of how many playmakers he has on his team, he has a way of being able to rotate and keep players happy and build youth prodigies. And I think Sané, seeing interviews and different articles and things that Pep had said, it was very clear that he was not happy seeing Sané go. Don't think there was too much that he could do about it. But I think that they could go out and get a similar youth potential player that could replace him. Because you have Raheem Sterling, you have Mahrez. But beyond that, it was always Sané at City. So I think if I was Pep, I'd look at a guy like Leon Bailey. He plays for Leverkusen. For those of you that don't know, I know anytime people mention Leverkusen, they talk about Kai Havertz. But Leon Bailey he's a left winger. He's got a lot of speed, a lot of pace. He can play good balls in. He can score when he needs to. He's actually a very similar player to Sané, just not quite as known. And I think he's got a really high potential. He plays for the Jamaican national team, and I could see him fitting in at a place like City under a manager like Pep Guardiola, as long as he was okay with being able to have a rotation role as opposed to a consistent, crucial starter. So I think that if I was Pep Guardiola, I'd at least look into it. And you really got to decide what's going to go on. I think that they have a lot more issues, and I don't think City's going to really be able to do anything until they figure out what's going on with this ban. So that's first thing first there. So I guess moving forward, if those of you don't know, Bayern Munich is my team. If you couldn't tell, my first reaction when Sané, the deal finally got made official, I kind of just breathed a sigh of relief. I was just like, whew. Thank God he didn't get injured again. Thank God there was no more drama. Like I could not handle any more drama with Sané because I felt like it was holding Bayern Munich up, and they were so almost tunnel visioned on getting Leroy Sané that it was preventing them from other players, other potential moves that I think Bayern could make. But I do think Sané was the most important one for us, and I think for the first time since Ribéry and Robben, we really have dual threat wingers to go with Lewandowski now. I think that front three of Serge Gnabry, Robert Lewandowski, and Leroy Sané is going to be explosive, not just for the Bundesliga, but for Champions League and everything else that they play in. If I'm any team in Europe right now, I'm not a happy camper that Sané went to Bayern. I also think it's impactful on that left side. You mentioned Alphonso Davies. I got to be honest, it's kind of hard to think about two players faster than Alphonso Davies or Leroy Sané, and I think that pace is going to be killer to a lot of teams, especially a lot of teams in the German league, but not just that. I think teams everywhere. I can't really think of too many right backs that can contain that type of speed, so a lot of managers and teams are going to have to play their cards around that left side of Bayern, and then you flip over to the right side and you still have to deal with Serge Gnabry, you still have to deal with Robert Lewandowski. You still have to deal with their midfield giants coming through. I think it's huge. But I think the biggest question is, how do you feel if you're Kingsley Coman, right? What do you think Kingsley Coman's feeling right now?
It's an interesting one because Coman seems to really like the Bayern system. So the question kind of begs, is he looking to get regular time, or is he willing to stick with Bayern and fight for a spot? If I'm Coman, I think Coman definitely has the capabilities to get a spot there. It may not always be the starting spot, but if you look at it, Bayern play a ton of games, probably 60 games a season when you factor in Champions League and all their competitions, if not probably more than that. So they're definitely going to need rotation players. So I think for me, what it boils down to is, does Coman want guaranteed starting football and to be the main winger and not have to fight for a spot, or is he willing to fight for a spot at a good club like Bayern? To be honest, I think that Coman is the type of player that he's going to want to fight for that spot and keep it.
Yeah, I've definitely been keeping up with this. I think you're right. I don't think he goes anywhere. I've seen a lot of rumors swirling around about Kingsley Coman and this and that because Sané came in. But I've also seen that he's come out and said that he wants to stay. So I really hope he does. I think a big factor in that is our coach, Hansi Flick. Before Flick, we had Niko Kovac as our manager, and before that, Ancelotti. And I don't think either of those guys were true players, coaches, the way that Hansi Flick is. And the team has really come together with him, and it seems like everyone wants to play with him, and he's done a decent job rotating the wingers. I also don't think, even with Sane, we have incredible depth there. You've got the three guys we've been talking about, Sane, Gnabry, and Coman, and Perisic. Other than that, we don't really have a ton of wingers, and I wouldn't be surprised if Perisic wasn't on the squad after this season. We have him on loan from Inter. I don't know that deal is going to be made permanent. Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, our CEO, has come out and said that Bayern is in a financial situation where we're not really going to be able to spend on any more than Leroy Sané. So that, to me, means that Perisic could be gone or more. And I just think, if we stick to the topic of the impact that Sané has, I think Coman is going to have to work for it. But I do think Coman's going to factor into the team as long as he stays healthy. Health has always been an issue with him, but he's our third best winger, and there's no way that he's not going to get playing time. And he's going to get time in big games too. It's not just going to be little ones. So I think that's going to be a huge factor. And if you think about his pace coming off the bench when guys are already tired, Bayern's just going to be a tough team to contain. And I'm trying to keep as unbiased as an opinion as I can. And without being biased, I really just think Bayern's a tough team to contain and will be probably for the next few years up until Lewandowski starts dropping form, which the way he's looking right now, he could be in the conversation for the Ballon d'Or. So I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. So yeah, I really think that Coman doesn't have anything to worry about, but it's an interesting topic to think about. And I especially am going to be looking to see what type of rotation we end up having for the next season and going into whether we can keep our form or not, because we've been doing really, really well.
I think also, too, what you have to factor in is that Sane also hasn't played a touch of football in a year. So, I mean, there's kind of play devil's advocate a little bit. We also kind of have to remember that he hasn't played in a long time and that it's going to take some time for him to adjust, get his fitness back, get used to playing, get comfortable playing again. I think Sane will definitely step up to that plate and he'll get that pretty quickly, but there is also that risk that he may not be doing so well. So losing a player like Coman or, having Coman leave, for example, and to not have a solid player to back up that spot in case Sane is a little bit slower to get back onto his feet, that's something to also consider too. Now, one more question I want to pose for you on the Bayern topic. I know we could obviously talk about this one forever. What do you think is going to happen with Mueller?
I think Mueller is going to stay put, and here's why. He just broke the record for most assists in the German league this past season. You don't break a record and not play. I think the guy that really got the short end of the stick this year, and he's not going to be with us anymore, is Coutinho. I think that he's a very interesting player to follow in general. But Mueller has pretty much locked down that center attacking mid-role. And so what Bayern looks like on a game-to-game basis, you're going to have Sané and Gnabry play the wings. You're going to have Lewandowski up top. It's going to be a 4-3-3 formation with the three triangle midfielders having Mueller at the top of the triangle. You'll have Goretzka and Kimmich playing with them right behind Mueller. And then whatever our back four looks like, depending on health and other transfers, right? Kind of avoiding talking about Thiago right now just because we don't really know what's going on in his future. Kimmich and Goretzka have the holding midfields pretty locked down, but I've always been a fan favorite of Thiago. I think he's the most underrated and most technically gifted midfielder in the game. I would be very upset if he did leave, but he's someone that could factor into that midfield as well. I just don't see Mueller losing that attack in mid-role. Playing in behind those three, he's going to be poised for another potential assist-breaking season. He's been back in form under Hansi Flick. I know he got a little bit of a cold streak for a little bit, but man, he has looked really good over the last few games, and he looks like he wants to play. And that's always been Mueller's biggest trait is his effort and his engine. He looks awkward doing it, but he gets the job done. And I think he's got the center attack mid role locked down for Bayern Munich going into next season.
He can also play on the wing too. I mean, you talk about the depth with Bayern, and he could definitely just pinch out into the wing if needed. I mean, obviously he's not exactly a speed threat, but he's also mentally smart. He knows what he's doing in the game. He's leading the league in assists, so he definitely has that dynamic to him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Bayern is in a good situation where they've got a lot of versatile players too, where if Mueller did need to move outside on the wing to replace injury or something like that, any number of players can come into the midfield and play that role. You can move Goretzka up. You can move Alaba up. Kimmich already plays up in the midfield. Don't forget we have Javi Martinez right now if he stays. So I think Bayern's got a deep squad. I'm real interested to see what happens in the Champions League and how Kingsley Coman plays now that Sane is officially here. But I think Mueller is someone to watch out for. He's been playing really, really well, and he's got it locked down. There's no taking his spot.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, dude's got it. But we could talk about Bayern forever. So we'll kind of shift gears here a little bit, and we'll kind of go into our next headline. This is obviously one that means a little bit more to me with my home club for sure. But the rumor of Sancho going to Manchester United. Tyler, give me your fresh take on that one.
Oh man, I actually kind of hope he stays at Dortmund. And that's probably surprising for a lot of people. Seeing a Bayern shirt on, you'd think I'd want Dortmund players to get the heck out of here. But I really like what Dortmund's doing, and I think Jadon Sancho is a huge impact for them. And thinking of him, Haaland, and Royce playing together as a front three is pretty dangerous. So I think from a Dortmund perspective, that's going to hurt if they do lose Sancho. I think financially speaking, if they can hold on to him for one more year and get a little bit more money from Manchester United for him next year, then that's huge. But, man, would he do some wonders for Manchester United, which is interesting. Given what the recent form you guys have, I got a question for you in a second. But before I get there, I think my take on United is you got Rashford, probably Martial, and you add Sancho to that mix. That's a fascinating, very pacey and creative front three. There's a lot of one-touch football going on there. You talk about Bruno Fernandes and Pogba with them. That's a scary team. I think that could really, really, really score a lot of goals and have a lot of really pacey counterattacks moving forward. But my question to you is, what about Mason Greenwood?
That's just it for me, man. I mean, here's the thing. When I kind of unpackage and I look at Sancho coming to United and the impact he can make and what that does for the rest of the squad, it's just very hard to pass up a talent like Jadon Sancho. I mean, the kid is 21 years old. He might have just turned 22. He's kicking it. He's doing very good for Bayern. He comes on, he makes an instant impact. He runs. I think he would definitely be a great addition. But at the same token, I also don't think United need to break the bank for him if the price is not right for him. I mean, I'd be okay with giving Greenwood a little bit more of a starting role, and he could flourish. I mean, if you look at him in these past couple games, and even throughout this whole season, he's done very well on the few appearances that he's had. He's almost halfway up the goal scoring table in the Premier League just based on his sub appearances. So Greenwood is one of those players that he's definitely going to stick it out with United. He's an academy boy. I don't think Sancho would make too much of an impact on his growth. It would stunt it maybe just a little bit, but I mean, the kid is 17 years old, or maybe he's 18 now, and he still has a lot of time under his belt. And I think he could learn a lot from the likes of Martial, Rashford, and Jadon Sancho. So all in all, I think that could be a positive result for us. But at the same time, though, I don't think that we need to break the bank. If the deal is too much, I think it's okay if we walk away. I think there's other candidates out there, and we could definitely put our faith in Mason Greenwood.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a similar situation to Coman, right? I think Greenwood would still get time. Exactly. I think he'd still be rotated in. But let me ask you this. Okay, so say you don't break the bank on Sancho. 2 questions. Number one, how would you feel if you chose not to break the bank on Sancho and someone like Manchester City or Chelsea or Tottenham, another English Premier League rival, did? And number 2, if you don't break the bank on Sancho, where do you spend your money this summer, if anywhere?
So, first question. Ooh, man, I cannot imagine Sancho going to another club in the EPL besides United. That terrifies me for sure. That is an interesting take. That definitely terrifies me. The only club I can see at this point that would, one, be able to afford him and also, give him the platform that he's looking for in his next club, I think it's really only City. I don't think Liverpool is going to be breaking the bank this year. They already have, a solid front three. I don't think they're going to be looking to expand that at all. So I think for me, if it's going to be another club, it'll probably be City, but I definitely do not want him at City, of course. Yeah. Definitely don't want any noise over there with the noisy neighbors, but I think it would have to be City if anybody. But honestly, I think he would be a great fit at United. To me, I just don't see this deal not going through. It just seems like all the rumors have suggested that this is definitely going to happen. I think it's just a matter of what price tag, and will COVID kind of play a factor in his price tag.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely the hottest rumor out there right now. That's why it's one of our headliners in this episode. I also think that if you guys were to not break the bank and he were to go to City, that kind of touches on the point earlier that we were talking about with, well, what does City do to counteract Leroy Sané leaving? Well, if they replace Leroy Sané, I know they play on opposite sides, but if they bring in Jadon Sancho, City doesn't miss a beat. You could almost argue that that's an upgrade, right? And then you start talking about, well, which is the better player, Leroy Sané or Jadon Sancho? I mean, I don't want to get into that debate too much, but it really depends on the fit and the style. And I think, too, to kind of counteract one point I want to make in regards to Dortmund, if Jadon Sancho were to leave and you were to ask me, what do you do to replace someone like that? There's a young kid. He's not Jadon Sancho. I don't know that he ever will be. But Giovanni Reyna, he's an American youth prospect. He plays for Dortmund. I think that it would really be a big opportunity for him. He's gotten a little bit of time towards the end of the season in the German league, and he looked really good from what I saw. And they also, when you have guys like Haaland and Royce, you can plug anyone in, and as long as Royce is healthy, of course, you can plug anyone into that right side, and they're going to be pretty okay. But I would really, really like to see Dortmund give Reyna a chance, not just for the sake that he's an American kid, and I want to see USA complement Pulisic with some other studs at some point. But I just think that it'd be a real interesting prospect for them. They're a team that is known for building youth and making profit off of that youth. It's exactly what they did with Sancho. It's what they're going to do with Haaland. It's what they've done with a lot of players in the past. But you look at that roster at Dortmund, I actually don't think they'll be suffering too much because they got Thorgan Hazard. They got Julian Brandt. If Royce stays healthy, you've got him. They just made the Emre Can deal permanent. They brought in Meunier on a free transfer. As a Bayern fan, especially with Werner leaving Leipzig, Dortmund is the scariest team as far as competition goes in the Bundesliga. And they've threatened us before. They've taken the title from us before. It's been many years. But I think Dortmund's headed in the right direction. And ultimately, I still wish Sancho stayed for one more year. But I do think he's going to go somewhere. I think it's going to be Manchester, whether it's City or United. I hope it's United because I'm not a City fan at all. And I think that he would make an interesting factor for your guys' squad. So that's,
to be honest, I don't even see him going to Manchester City because if anyone recalls, before he was at Dortmund, he was at Manchester City.
No, that's true.
He was the one that wanted out of City, and I think I've seen a couple of reports of Pep saying that no, Sancho wanted out. I don't think they have any plans of getting him. I mean, of course, no one entertains those rumors until like deals are actually done. So of course he wouldn't comment on it if they were going for him. Right. But I just don't see him wanting to go back to City, especially with how it didn't really work out for him in the past, and that's what forced him to leave and go to Dortmund. So to me, I think he definitely wants to go to the Premier League. I think United is really his big option. But just real quick to kind of tackle back to your last point, if we weren't to get Sancho, where would we put that money? To me, I think we need to get either another center half to go with Harry Maguire, or we can look to get a little bit of a stronger left back in Luke Shaw. Brandon Williams is young, up and coming, and he could definitely take that spot, but the kid's only 17, 18 years old, so he's still going to need a little bit more time to flourish and probably not a regular starter yet. So I think that if I'm United and we don't go for Sancho, I think it would definitely be somewhere in our defense.
Yeah, for years. I mean, years. I've known you for a long time. We go way back to middle school, for those of you that don't know. You've been begging for a center back for many, many years at United. Last year, you guys brought in Harry Maguire. A lot of people really questioned that, especially for the price tag. I personally think that he's done well. So on that point, I know we're mainly talking about Sancho and his potential bringing in at United. But if you were to go center back, who would you look to complement Harry Maguire so well? Like if you had your ideal transfer?
So for me, the ideal candidate is probably someone who's not – he's a good player, and he's probably on a lot of teams' radars. But for me, the big thing with Maguire is that he doesn't have as much pace as a lot of other center have. So while he's very smart mentally, he's great physically. He's just got good smarts to him. He's a solid defender. I think what we need is a little bit more pace. And a defender that I've been looking at, and I'm really hoping United look down this, is Upamecano. That man is young. He's strong. He's proven. He's played Champions League. He is one of those players that I think would be really good for this. And then obviously another one I would love to get, but I don't think we'd break the bank for, is Koulibaly. He's over at Napoli. He's obviously a great player as well. But to be fair, Lindelof isn't a bad center back. So if we don't go with the center back, it's not the end of the world. But I think if you're talking about United pushing for, being the Premier League champions and even making a good run at the Champions League, I think that is definitely a spot that we could bolster.
Yeah, I like that. And, I think I like the name Upamecano. He's a warrior. Same with Koulibaly, but he's expensive. I think when you think about Upamecano, there are a couple other names that I'll just throw out real quick before we move to our next topic is Konate. He plays right next to Upamecano for Leipzig. He's young. He doesn't get quite as much playing time, but I think he's someone to be looking for in the next year or two. And the center back at Inter, I think it's Skriniar. I don't know how to pronounce it. Skriniar. I think he's a Serbian center back. He plays for Inter. He's on a lot of hot lists or short lists this year too. So I think those guys and Koulibaly are definitely the center backs to look out for if they go anywhere this year. But, moving forward, a big topic that I definitely want to talk about, I know you do too, and I know even one of our followers is excited waiting for this tonight, the future of Barcelona, right? There's a lot going on over at Barcelona right now, a lot of stuff, and it's not all positive. For the first time
it's also not negative either.
Yeah, it's a big question mark. It's a lot of uncertainty at Barcelona right now. And I think if you're a Barcelona fan, uncertainty is kind of scary. So there's a lot that we can touch on. I'll kind of leave it to you. Where do you want to start when you think about the future of Barcelona?
Oh, man. I mean, when you kind of think about the future, you kind of have to unpackage what they have, right? And when you're packaging what they currently have, the biggest topic that everyone has to obviously talk about is Griezmann. I mean, 120 million transfer. He hasn't done bad for the side. I mean, he scored a decent amount of goals. I think I saw a report that he's played just as well as Neymar in his first year, which I know Neymar wasn't the greatest when he first went to Barcelona either, so it may not be the best comparison. But, when you have the manager coming out and saying you have a hard time fitting a $120 million transfer in his roster, that is a pretty big red flag that there's something going on over there. And, I mean, there's a ton of conflict all over the place. But for me, I just think it's tough to fit Griezmann into the squad. I mean, you have to kind of put him on the left side because it's hard to take that starting spot away from Luis Suarez, and especially when Griezmann isn't having as consistent of runs as he should be, or that he's expected to with that type of price tag. You have to wonder that it's kind of hard to figure out what to do with him, and I think the manager has a lot of interesting concepts to kind of think about when he manages the squad, and that's something I kind of want to touch on a little bit later. But kind of segueing into the future of Barca, what do you think about the replacement between Pjanic and Arthur?
Man, that I really don't get it. I think to touch on the Griezmann topic real quick, I have to throw a take on Griezmann.
Sure.
Stats-wise, he doesn't look too bad, you're right. But over the last few games, he hasn't been starting. When they played Atletico Madrid, they subbed him on in the 90th minute, and that really didn't sit well with him or his family. But I think there's a game against Villarreal this past week where they put Suarez and Griezmann both up top, where he got to play his second striker role, and they moved Messi in behind them. I thought that worked. They won 4-1. They looked better from what I saw. I think if moving forward they use that in the short term, that could work. That could be a way with Griezmann. But my biggest thing is everybody's all, hate on Griezmann this, hate on Griezmann that. Griezmann's going to go. Griezmann's not worth the money. We should let him go. Absolutely not. I think that Barcelona fans and soccer fans around the world need to be patient with Griezmann. You don't just move from a system like Atletico Madrid to a system like Barcelona and pick it up on the fly. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces that go there, and I think with more patience, Griezmann will do really well. But to touch on your point, the Arthur and Pjanic swap just doesn't make sense to me, and here's why. When you look at Barcelona's squad, there is an incredible gap in the difference between the age of the veterans and the age of the youth. And when you think about veterans, you've got guys like Jordi Alba, who's over 30 years old. Gerard Piqué is over 30 years old. Sergio Busquets is over 30 years old. Arturo Vidal is over 30 years old. Ivan Rakitic is over 30 years old. Lionel Messi is over 30 years old. Luis Suarez is over 30 years old. And Griezmann's 29. That's like 8 players that generally probably start for them. Okay, then you look at their youth. They do have a lot of good youth, right? Ansu Fati's the next big thing. Sergio Roberto, I think Lenglet is a young player for them. He's a young center back. Obviously, Frankie de Jong they bought in last year. That was a huge deal. He's done well for them. But Arthur was one of those young studs. And when you think about Barcelona, and as long as I've remembered, when the question was, what do we do after Ronaldinho? The answer was Messi. And now the question is, what are we eventually going to do after Messi? I don't know what the answer is. And if I'm Barcelona, the one thing I'm really trying to do moving forward is get my youth ready, because a lot of these old guys in the next 4 to 5 years are going to be gone. They're not going to be factors anymore. And the youth with the players that I mentioned, and Umtiti and Fati and all of these guys, their youth have to be able to step up. They have to be ready to perform at a high level, both in La Liga and in Champions League, because Barcelona has a brand and a reputation to uphold, and they got to not only compete with Real Madrid, but they got to compete with the rest of the world. And I'm not convinced that their youth is ready, but I was convinced that Arthur was a strong potential candidate to play in that midfield alongside Frankie de Jong for a long time. And what they do to solve the problem is they swap Arthur for Pjanic, who's over 30 years old. So, I do think Miralem Pjanic is a great player, but I'm just not sure what direction Barcelona is trying to go right now. I know they'll be okay in the short term, but when you look 5 years down the road, I don't know where this team's going to be, and I don't know, that they're going to have to spend some money to figure it out. So I think that age gap is a huge issue for me, and I'd like to see a little bit more either money spent or development or something in between to get those youth players ready for the next step. What are your thoughts on that?
So for me, I think that when you kind of look at the Messi situation, right, you look at Barcelona, but before we even look at Messi and Barcelona, you kind of have to go back to like those really big impact players and where they were at with their previous clubs. Manchester United, when they lost Ronaldo, they went to a slump afterwards because, there's just a certain mentality that you kind of, shift towards giving that star player the ball a little bit more often, because they create opportunities with it, which is completely understandable. I think Barcelona will go through that phase, but I think the difference is that Barcelona will still have some solid players around them. They're always going to be one of the top two teams in the Spanish league. So for me, even when they lose Messi, I feel like they're going to have enough of a basis to go out and get a couple players to kind of bolster that squad a little bit. And while I do agree that the gap between, the older players and the younger players is pretty high, I'm not as concerned with that because the youth players that they do have are solid candidates. Like you mentioned, Frankie de Jong, Ansu Fati. Another one that I don't think was mentioned too was Puig. He's really good as well.
Yeah.
So they do have a couple of those players. Are those guys regular starters and going to be the Barcelona that we know now? More than likely not. And I think that they're going to have to go through some sort of rebuilding phase. But if you look at Barca's history, their history is that they have done very well at building players up from their academy, much like a Manchester United, Bayern Munich and Dortmund, those clubs. And I think that they're going to go back to their roots with Messi, because when Messi kind of came up, he was a youth player in their academy. So I think that they're going to kind of more so invest in youth and go back into going that route versus like buying a ton of stars, because when you look at Griezmann and how they feel about Griezmann right now, you kind of get the sense that they weren't as happy with this transfer so far. But I do agree with you. Once Messi goes or, Suarez starts to fall out of form, Griezmann is definitely going to be their guy, but he is 29 years old. So I guess the hard part is, how long does a 29-year-old wait to have that moment at Barcelona? And I think that's kind of what it boils down to for me. But I think Barca are in for a little bit of a bumpy road. But I think with being in La Liga and how there is kind of a big gap between Atletico, Real, and Barca between the rest of the clubs, I think they will manage pretty well. They just may not do as well in the Champions League, if I had to guess.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because you mentioned earlier you kind of think of it from a managerial perspective. And I know from a manager's perspective, you talked a lot about youth. But if you're their manager right now, and the way managers work in football and really in all sports, there's not a lot of time given to managers to find success. And I personally think that rebuilding a team as a manager is one of the most risky things you can do, because if it doesn't work out, especially at a club with the prestige and attention as Barcelona, how long do you really last, right? Are you going to have enough years to develop that youth to really have that success again? So if you're their manager right now and you're thinking, how do I keep my job for the next 5 years or beyond? What is it that you're looking at doing for Barcelona?
This is a tough one. There are a lot of different factors to think about when you're putting yourself in the shoes of the Barcelona manager right now. To be honest, I do know that there is quite a bit of tension between Lionel Messi and their current coach. So I do think that poses a pretty big issue, considering that Messi is the face of their club and is a homegrown player. So that's definitely a concern. So he has to keep Messi happy to a degree, but he's also got to keep the players happy, because he's not exactly sure what his team might look like in the next couple months. So you don't want to overcommit to, leaving players out or like having players not be happy going into a transfer window when I mean, Messi still has a couple years, so I think that he'll definitely be around a little bit. But you have to listen to Messi, but you also have to factor in the players and how they're going to fit in with the squad. So it's just tough to navigate through the situation. But I think that if I'm Barcelona's coach, I would invest in the youth because they're very good at making those homegrown players. There's a ton of seniority, like you mentioned, how there's 30-year-olds on the team. That's plenty of
it's a veteran presence,
senior players
right?
to learn from.
Yeah, I mean I talk about that as a negative thing, but there is a positive to take from a veteran presence in a locker room, and a lot of those youth guys do have a lot to learn from. I want to ask you one more question, touch on one more thing about Barcelona before we wrap up with a surprise segment at the end for the night. But flipping it to a player's perspective, you mentioned the disconnect between Messi and the executives and coaching staff right now. Messi, I believe it's 1 or 2 more years on his contract left. I know he'll be 34 when his contract at Barcelona expires. If you're him, do you stay at Barcelona for the rest of your career, or do you think about moving on somewhere else, and or what needs to happen to keep you there?
If I'm Messi, and I think I'm just more me wanting to talk about the what if of Messi leaving, I would love to see Messi tackle another club. I really would. I would love to see what kind of impact he can have in multiple clubs because and when you talk about comparing Messi with Ronaldo, the one thing that kind of hinders Ronaldo a little bit is that, he has jumped from club to club. But what's been impressive about that is that he's made such an impact at other clubs. I would love to see how Messi can come into a side that he's never played with when he's so used to the Barca system and seeing what kind of impact that he can make at a club. I would be really interested to see that. But if I'm Messi, I think he's got a lot of stake in Barcelona. And I don't think he needs to look elsewhere. I think what it boils down to is this is a choice from Barcelona. Do Barcelona want to keep their coach when they're kind of conflicting at this point, or do they want to keep investing in Messi, who's only got, maybe 2 to 3 years left, probably. It could even be less, who knows? So I think for Barcelona, the bigger question is what do they do with this situation? So let me kind of turn this a little bit to you then. If you're the owner of Barcelona, are you siding with your manager or are you siding with Messi? If it comes down to sides, I guess.
Oh man, that's a tough question. It's so hard not to side with Messi because coaches have come and gone at Barcelona and Messi has stayed. Not only that, you really got to think about the business side of this. Messi is a business himself. There is a ton of money that comes into Barcelona just because of Lionel Messi. If he goes somewhere else, they lose that, right? That's a big loss, not just for the loss of the stake, the quality of player that Messi has, but the quality of business that he brings. That's a huge deal. The fanboy in me would love to see Messi go and play with Ronaldo at Juventus. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But the actual, when it comes to seeing things out the right way, I would like to see Messi spend his career at Barcelona kind of the same way that Xavi did. And if he goes anywhere else, let him go to Argentina or somewhere like that. I don't know. But I would like to see him see his career out. But from a manager's perspective, I would roll with Messi over the coach. I really would. I know that
I agree.
My brain doesn't necessarily agree, but my heart does. And I just think that Messi's the right call and the one to follow with.
I completely agree. But we could talk about all these topics, obviously, forever. So we are going to kind of segue this and shift gears a little bit with a new surprise segment. So Transfer Tuesdays, we are going to be implementing what is going to be called our Flop or Flourish segment, where essentially I'm going to ask Tyler here. We're going to kind of go over 5 of the most recent transfer rumors or subjects, essentially. And then Tyler is going to give his take on whether he thinks it's a flop or flourish. And then I will also kind of give my counterpoints to that as well. So it should be an interesting segment. It will usually be a little bit more current as the weeks progress. So if there's any that you guys would like to see on our next flop or flourish, please let us know. And we would love to carry those in here. So kind of going through the first one, let's talk about Chilwell at Leicester City potentially going to Chelsea. Do you think that'll be a flop or a flourish?
Flourish. I like that move. I think the missing piece to Chelsea's puzzle is a left back. And I think that when you look at their team, you've got Marcos Alonso. He's not a bad player. He's not bad by any means. He's a little bit more of an offensive threat, and I think he can be susceptible to be countered sometimes. You've got Emerson, who honestly just isn't quite convincing. And you've got a potential chance of bringing in a guy like Chilwell, who has proven to be pretty darn good this past season. And I think that he would fit in there well. I think Chelsea's defense is what needs to be revamped the most. You look at Azpilicueta, he's getting a little older. Rudiger's solid back there. But I really think a solid left back for them is going to be the move to make, and I think Ben Chilwell would be the right guy. I think he would absolutely flourish for a long time to come.
I think so too. Chilwell is one of those players that he looks stronger in the defense. He makes the defense look a lot stronger. He's been very good on one-on-one situations. He's been pretty impressive this year. So I definitely think that would be a flourish for Chelsea. And, definitely be a pretty big hit for Leicester City. But interesting take. I definitely think that would also be a flourish. We touched on this one a little bit earlier today, but I've seen quite a few rumors of Koulibaly going to Manchester City. Do you think that will be a flop or a flourish?
My take on this might be a little controversial. I'm going to say flop. And the reason I say flop is because I think if Manchester City go out and get a guy of the caliber of Koulibaly, he's going to have the expectation of being Manchester City's Virgil van Dijk. He's not necessarily the youngest player out there, but he's going to be expected to come in and be the next best thing. And I love Koulibaly, but I'm not sure coming from the Italian Napoli system into the English game, specifically at Manchester City, where you're working with Pep and it's always competition in the club. I want to say that he would flourish, but I think his bar of expectations would be so high, kind of like how Griezmann. People, if you asked, was Griezmann a flop or a flourish, they would say flop. But if you looked at his stats, he's been scoring goals. I think it would be a similar situation. I think Koulibaly would do okay, but the general public would think that it was a flop just because they had too high of expectations going into it.
Yeah. So I disagree. I think this will definitely be a flourish. And my take on this one is a little bit different than yours. When you look at how he's performed right now at Napoli, he's the captain of Napoli. And when you look at the center halves for Manchester City, Laporte is not exactly a leader. He's still relatively young. I think he's like 23, 24 years of age. So he's definitely getting up there. He's getting into his prime. But I do think that Koulibaly being the main center back there, he's already a well-known defender. He would be a leader within that defense, and he would run a tight ship over at Manchester City with I wouldn't say much better defenders, but a little bit better quality of defenders in Manchester City than as opposed to Napoli. So for me, I think he would be a flourish there. Whether they're going to want to pay his price tag, that's a whole different issue. Yeah. But in terms of the actual move itself, I think that'll definitely be a flourish. Okay. Here's an interesting one. We'll segue over to France a little bit. I've seen quite a few rumors of Bellerin going to PSG. Do you think that will be a flop or a flourish?
Bellerin's an interesting one. Can I answer neutral? I mean, I think I would lean a little bit more flourish, but it's close because Bellerin, he fits at Arsenal pretty decently and has for quite a while. And when you make a move from Arsenal to the club of PSG is going to walk through the French league and they're going to get to Champions League. So PSG is always defined on, can you flourish in Champions League or not? And for many years, it's been no. I'm not sure that Bellerin's the right answer for that. But I think when you ask, is Bellerin specifically going to flourish as a player? I do think going into France, going back home would be good for him. And I would like to see that happen, especially because France or PSG just lost Meunier. Bellerin would be a perfect, he'd fit right into their puzzle. The system wouldn't change at all. So that's why I think it could go both ways, but I lean a little bit more towards flourish just because he'd be able to come in and make an instant impact at a position that they need.
Yeah, I'd actually completely agree with that. I'm more of a neutral point of view as well, but I think I would side more so with the flourish. When you kind of look at Bellerin, he's been at Arsenal for a long time. He's been through all the ups and downs that they've been going through these past couple of years, changing managers, even under Arsene Wenger. So to me, I feel like he's a little bit tired of the drama that's been going on at Arsenal, and I think that it would revitalize his football a little bit more if he were to go somewhere else and go to like a club like PSG. So I think he would flourish there. I'm not sure if he's got the quality to necessarily be like the best player, the best outside back at PSG, or like he might be fighting for a spot over there. So I think that could be slightly risky in that sense, but I think it would refresh his football a little bit if he were to go to a club outside of Arsenal. So for me, I would say it's a little bit of a flourish, but you could definitely go either way on that one. I agree. Sticking with France a little bit and actually talking about Arsenal with Bellerin, Guendouzi potentially leaving Arsenal, and there's been a lot of rumors of him going into the French league. So since we're keeping this topic based and we don't have an exact end club, Guendouzi leaving Arsenal and going to a French side, is that a flop or a flourish? Or sorry, let's do it this way. Guendouzi leaving Arsenal, is that a flop or a flourish?
I really want him to stay, but I think Guendouzi, when you watch him play, he's got such an engine trait about him. He's got such a passion. He may have to grow up a little bit. Don't get me wrong. I know there's some issues going on there, and he's probably going to be leaving. You're right. But I think he's going to flourish wherever he goes. I think he's got a lot of room to grow. He's got a lot of potential. He's a young stud. I think he'd flourish. I really do. I think the best fit for him is going to be in France, probably with someone like a Lyon or something like that to give him consistent playing time. I think that's what he needs, is to be able to just play every single game and be a star. And then eventually a couple years on down the road, someone else is going to buy him one of the bigger clubs. It could be PSG. It could be Barcelona, something like that, right? You talk about Barcelona missing pieces. I think in a couple years, bringing Guendouzi in to play with Frankie de Jong and company would be awesome for Barcelona. I think it's a little too soon right now, but I think him going to a French side specifically, I think he would flourish. I think he'd flourish wherever he goes.
See, I actually feel the opposite. I think that would be a flop, because I think that with Guendouzi right now, is he's playing in the EPL and he's getting a lot. He's improving week in and week out, and I think that there is a lot to be gained in that. And I think as a young player, someone who's, got a lot of promise to him, one that a lot of clubs and a lot of, fans are looking at, I think for him, he needs to stay in the Premier League. And I feel like he would get into some interesting situations at Arsenal, because they're not as thriving of a club in the EPL, you would say. So I think he gets good exposure to playing those good sides, but also, playing the middle of the pack sides and, having more tighter games and getting more playing time. I think he would still thrive at Arsenal. Now, I know there's a lot of personal issues going on, so that's kind of my take on it with the personal aside, but obviously factoring in the personal and having him wanting to leave and, hearing that he potentially wants to leave. I do think it would be good for him if he left from the sense of like from his mental state, just because you have been hearing quite a few rumors of him, not working out so far at Arsenal. But yeah, I do think he thrives so well in that Arsenal lineup, just like you mentioned earlier. He's just such a good fit for the club. So I just have a hard time seeing him grow as much as a player outside of Arsenal.
I think there's a little bit, I know we're getting there on time, but to debate it a little bit, I think there's a little bit of it depends factor. And the reason I say that is kind of similar to Bellerin, right? I think it would be a flourish because it would be good for him to get out of the drama that Arsenal is going through right now. If they don't qualify for European football, it would be good for him to get to a team that does. Whereas if he stays at Arsenal and they don't qualify for Europe, I'm just not sure that the problems are going to go away. I'm not 100% bought in on Arsenal getting through this yet. I think they can. I think Arteta is potentially the right guy. But until they prove that they are in better form and in better form for the long term, I'm not sure it's the best spot for Guendouzi to stay. I think that he's got a lot of potential and could do a lot more elsewhere. And I would stick with Flourish. I really would. But I do see your points, right? I mean, they're valid points. And he's another one where you could really go either way. I really like this flop or flourish discussion topic that we have. And, I think personally, I want to hear what our followers have to say too, right? If you're seeing this and you hear me and Andy talk about Guendouzi potentially leaving Arsenal, let us know what you guys think too. One more time, I do want to mention, follow us on Instagram, The Reserve Squad, and subscribe to our YouTube. But I know we're still kind of talking about Guendouzi. I just want to make sure our followers get an opinion too. But what other points do you have, or where do you want to go from here?
From here, I would like to leave with the cliffhanger, actually. I would like to see what our followers think. So I'm going to drop a question, and if you have if there's something if you have an opinion, please comment down in the comment section. But where do you think Adama Traore is going to go, if anywhere, this transfer window? We'll talk about that next week, but we'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are. So thank you guys so much for joining. It was obviously a pleasure. Tyler, transfer talk is always an interesting topic for both of us.
Always, baby.
And I'm excited for the future of it as well. So get ready for some more Flop and Flourish next week, and we will catch you guys later.
Yep. You guys have a good one.